Pack your bags, FDA workers. That's a message from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the independent candidate turned Trump ally, after endorsing the president-elect this summer. Trump reportedly promised RFK Jr. a role in the administration in turn for his support once he dropped out of the race. It now appears that he will be a health czar of sorts, to avoid RFK Jr. having to go through a Senate confirmation process. RFK Jr. took to X following Trump's victory, saying, quote, "The FDA's war on public health is about to end. This includes its aggressive suppression of psychedelics, peptides, stem cells, raw milk, hyperbaric therapies, chelating compounds, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and anything else that advances human health but can't be patented by pharma."
Speaking to MSNBC on Wednesday, RFK Jr. said entire departments within the Food and Drug Administration could be shut down. Let's watch.
He's been very specific in what he said. He wants me to do three things. One, clean up the corruption of the agencies, particularly the conflicts of interest that have turned those agencies into captive agencies for the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry, the other industries that they're supposed to be regulating. Number two, to return those agencies to the gold standard science, the empirically based, evidence-based medicine that they were famous for when I was a kid. And number three, to make America healthy again, to end the chronic disease epidemic. And President Trump has told me that he wants to see measurable, concrete results within 2 years in terms of a measurable diminishment in chronic disease among America's kids.
A few days before the election, RFK said that he would advise Trump to rid Americans drinking water of fluoride. That caused quite the uproar. RFK Jr.'s cause célèbre has been against vaccinations, not just COVID, but those that have become standard for a healthy baseline. All right, so RFK, as predicted, would probably not be in a cabinet position because of the Senate confirmation process that he probably would not get through. So we'll serve in some kind of advisory role related to probably FDA as well as Department of Agriculture. And he's gone full bore. He's already posting videos promising that they better watch out. He's coming after them. What do you think about this?
Well, what I think basically is that RFK Jr. is focusing upon the elements of his platform, for want of a better term, that have broader approval. So, for example, there are too many additives in American food, or the FDA is too close to Big Pharma. I think those are things that a lot of people are sympathetic to. They're views that many people share or at least think deserve to be heard. My problem with it, frankly, is the fact that it's coming from him, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr., as we noted in the introduction, has this history of, to be generous, extreme skepticism toward vaccines. And I know that he has a lot of online fans, and anytime you criticize him, there's always this thing about people just label him as a crank or whatever, and without offering specifics. There was famously a story he wrote some time ago for Salon and Rolling Stone that was retracted by one news organization and deleted by the other because of false information about the purported link, or what he was alleging to be a link, between vaccines and autism. This is way before COVID. Briefly, there was another thing in American Samoa around 2018 when 2 infants died soon after taking the MMR vaccine. The reason they died was tragic but quite straightforward. Nurses had introduced muscle relaxant into a mix when they were supposed to introduce water into a mix. RFK seized on that to push extreme skepticism about vaccines, met with anti-vax people in American Samoa. What happened was the next year there was a measles outbreak, 83 children died. So I see him as a genuinely dangerous individual who is using these more popular, you could even say more moderate positions as a kind of Trojan horse for a very dangerous agenda.
I suppose that my perspective on it is that there are enough people within the Trump campaign, to the transition team, to the administration, that would push back on some of the more conspiratorial elements. But I would say probably 90% of what he talks about, I have concerns about too, whether it's, as you mentioned, processed food, but also SSRIs and antidepressant and anxiety medications, ADHD medications, which are being given to children as young as 3 years old. And the CDC recently added multiple COVID vaccines to the childhood vaccination schedule. Howard Lutnick, who's helping to run the Trump transition team, has been a little bit less specific about RFK and his opposition to vaccines, but has talked about the aggression of the childhood vaccine schedule and just how many doses of different vaccines are given within the first 6 months of a child's life, which I think actually a lot of parents have concerns about. And one of the reasons that I think the Democrats overestimated female support for Kamala Harris was that they underestimated female support for RFK Jr. And we talked a little bit about this before the election, about how there is a sort of crunchy mom movement taking over, both conservative but also sort of center-leaning women, and also young women, Gen Z women, who are getting off of birth control, hormonal birth control in droves because of their concerns about that. They hear from RFK, maybe they don't agree with 100% of the things he says, but he seems to be the only person really legitimately taking seriously their concerns about public health, and so they're willing to lump in a little bit of bad with the good if it means that some of these things are going to get addressed.
I think that is a very valid point as far as what you term the crunchy moms and the suspicion or skepticism of things like additives in food and some of the other jokes you mentioned. I suppose where I would differ, Amber, is when you talk about, he's the only person putting forward that view. Is it not that he's the most famous person putting forward that view, and that part of that fame is, of course, his family name, but part of it is also his actual willingness to go down the conspiracy route, and the fact that, although I think that's completely erroneous and dangerous, it gets you fans from people who buy into those conspiracies. Does not give you pause that someone like that is potentially in this position?
I guess I just prefer that someone be willing to explore what is considered off limits, considering how many things the public health bureaucracy got wrong during COVID because they were so uncurious. If he's the only person in charge and he's allowed to run wild and maybe he goes somewhere that is actually conspiratorial, then that's bad. But I'd rather someone with an open mind be in there looking at science rather than just accepting what we've all been told to accept over the past 40 years in public health. I mean, that's what led to the disastrous lockdowns. That's what led to them telling us that COVID vaccines weren't messing with women's menstrual cycles, that COVID vaccines were going to stop us from getting COVID and stop us from spreading COVID, and all of these other narratives that were just latched onto by people who weren't really actually digging into any of the data.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a certain amount of common ground here and also differences. Like, I just think when one talks about open-mindedness, I think of someone like RFK Jr. as, in fact, close-minded at the other extreme, always looking for evidence, however specious.
Reactionary, so to speak.
To back up his thing. So.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One other thing that I just wanted to mention, because it's sort of an underreported part of the election story, is that in Pennsylvania, the Amish community came out in droves for Trump, in part because of a federal raid of a raw milk farm that was accused of causing illness in children. And even going back further from this specific incident, I know allies of the Trump campaign were working hard to register Amish voters in the past 4 years. And I suspect, we don't really have great numbers or data on the Amish community, but I suspect that helped make a difference in both his victory and probably McCormick's as well.
No, I suspect it did. And, Amish citizens have as much right to vote as anybody. I think the state has a legitimate reason to try to crack down on dangerous milk. But anyway, we'll get to that. We'll get to other topics in due course. Stay with us. We will have more Rising after this.